And happy Thursday evening, ladies and gentlemen, fantasy football fans out there. We've got fresh football on the TV tonight with preseason action, and we are coming to you with another episode of
Woo!
Fantasy. That is correct.
Let's go.
With the elongated Woo Fantasy, brought to you as always by Rotoballer.com and, of course, Underdog Fantasy. Rotoballer.com, your one-stop shop for all things fantasy. Go today to Rotoballer.com/discount. Woo Fantasy is the Woo is the promo code to get you a special discount at checkout. Go grab that premium today. Has everything that you need for the 2023 fantasy football season. That is premium rankings by, of course, including yours truly, articles to get you set up for drafts as drafts are coming over the course of the next few weeks, in-season management, during draft tools. We've got you covered at rotoballer.com. Go to rotoballer.com today to sign up for that premium package. But bringing in premium package, yes, of course. So, of course, we have yet again the co-host Nick Hefley back in as we are getting closer and closer to the 2023 season. Like I mentioned, we had football on tonight. How are you feeling, man?
Live football's going on. We got guys that we can actually take a look at and see some live action versus all of this. I guess how we're having to analyze some of these guys here on training camp news and practice news. We actually get to see a live game, so it's nice.
Yes, definitely. And of course, you just had the Texans and Patriots game in. Texans coming home with the victory 20-9. Late garbage time touchdown by Malik Cunningham for the Patriots tonight. So I guess really the couple more of the bigger takeaways from that game. You didn't really see a lot of the starters playing for either team tonight, but you had Tank Dell. Looked like he had a little bit of a surprising showing tonight. He looked pretty good. But I would say, first and foremost, what was your takeaway from the couple drives we saw from C.J. Stroud tonight? First step on the field for the rookie in NFL action.
I mean, it looked like things were coming a little quick for him. I don't know if that was because the line wasn't exactly blocking great for him, but it seemed extremely vanilla. Even with that, though, the one pick that he had was, it's not very good. It looked like the NFL kind of got the best of him just a little bit on that one there. Tank Dell, I don't know if you noticed that move. He's the talk of the night. Huge night. I mean, the catch in the end zone was great, but if you go back and look at that pick, the move that he made shook the DB out of his legs. So I think he's more the story absolutely for tonight. C.J. Stroud, I mean, you saw very, very limited work there. That offensive line, he's probably going to be doing a lot of running.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing that you could see with Tank Dell tonight is these, ability to create separation in the open field was on full display in that game tonight. Obviously, he's going to be a name to really kind of keep an eye on as preseason really starts to unfold and we get closer to the NFL regular season. Not really a guy that's been on the radar when it comes to especially redraft leagues, but definitely a late round dart throw that's been in dynasty leagues, rookie drafts, things of that nature. So what's your takeaway? How do you value him moving forward right now with this one game? Is it something that we're gonna be surprised that how that ADP rises from this point forward?
Yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things, especially in an offense like that. I mean, I don't think there's a number one out there. I mean, I know you and I have liked Nico Collins a little bit through the process, but let's face it, he's not exactly lighting the world on fire. He's had chances to be that number one guy, hasn't really done it yet. So, could Tank Dell be that guy? I don't know, but he's worth a wide receiver 6 or 7 in that offense there just to see what can happen. I know I like Dalton Schultz this year, which we'll get into tight ends a little bit later here tonight. You got John Mechie out there, but Tank Dell, I mean, the moves he was showing tonight, I mean, those are NFL moves.
Right. Yeah. And then obviously the biggest detriment when it came to Tank Dell, going through the draft process before the NFL draft was, the size situation with Tank Dell. A very undersized receiver. Drew a lot of comparisons to Tutu Atwell for the Rams, going through the process and the testing process. But as opposed to what we've seen out of Tutu Atwell at the NFL level, there's really not been that many flashes that we've seen from Atwell. But I mean, tonight we saw Tank Dell really flash. Now the thing is going to be consistency. How can he continue to be consistent moving forward? Can he present a situation where he forces his way onto the field, draws more usage, tries to pull back more of a target share in the offense? But like you said, I mean, there's a lot of mouths to feed, but there's no guaranteed number one option right now, and I think that's a gamble when you're looking at the Texans wide receivers. They all go wide. They all go pretty late in drafts as it is right now, and especially on underdog drafts, you can get a lot of these guys fairly late in drafts. So really, I mean, it's wide open, like we just mentioned. So I think Tank Dale is a guy that may not be that consistent early on in the season, but could be a guy that especially in redraft leagues, pick up awfully late. Could be a flex option for you as you get down the stretch and into the playoff run.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you. That's what I remember hearing in kind of the lead up to the draft. There was how small this guy is. Is it me? He didn't look small. Like
he did not.
He did not look Deuce Vaughn small out there. Like,
no,
he actually looked like he. I mean, he wasn't huge by any standard, but he didn't look small.
No, not at all. Yeah, he actually looked a little bit more oversized than what the measurements were at the combine. Yeah, it's a good point to bring up. Is how can these guys do they play bigger on the field than what their stature represents? And that's the thing with him. Tonight he looked like he belonged on the field, so that's an encouraging sign if you have interest in a guy like Tank Dell in drafts. But we're about to get into the second game, the Vikings and the Seahawks too. So obviously we're not going to see Kenneth Walker in this game. We might see a little bit of Zach Charbonnet. I think that's probably a hope. I'd like to get my eyes on Zach Charbonnet in this game to see what might possibly happen. So what are you going to be looking for out of this game coming up?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think the running backs are going to be, where I'm taking a look at. I feel like we'll see a little JSN as well out there, just to kind of see, what he's got. Let him get, some looks here. So game's starting up here. Do we see Zach Charbonnet? How much do we see him? Mm-hmm. Who are we going to see at the Vikings running back? Let's see. Who's it at right there? Who's number 3? Is that Madison? He changed his number. Who's number 3 out there for them?
That's a good question. I think
Jordan Addison.
Right. See how some of the starting lineups look a little bit there. Yeah, that is Jordan Addison out there.
Okay. He's the only name that I could actually read.
Right. Yeah, similar situation in the game we just saw. You're probably not going to see too many of the starters on the field. Obviously you see Jalen Reagor's on the field right now, so that top tier Vikings offense is not going to be on the field.
One of my best calls in fantasy, Jalen Reagor, not doing jack crap.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to this day, you have to feel like the Eagles have to still be kicking themselves over that for taking Jalen Reagor ahead of Justin Jefferson in that draft. That I'm sure that's haunting them still to this day. But
who we got in there? I didn't. I've got everything on mute here with us doing this. 32.
32. Yep.
Who is that? Is that Ngakoue?
Is that Ngannou? No, that's Ty Chandler, I believe. Ty Chandler, okay. 32. Yeah. So obviously, some of the poor camp reports we've heard out of Ty Chandler over the course of the last couple of weeks. I think it's good that he's on the field first. That should represent that he's solidly the RB2 right now, behind Madison. I think that's going to be something for conjecture purposes as we get into the latter stages of the preseason into the regular season. Is Ty Chandler, Dwayne McBride? How's that RB2 situation shake out behind Madison? How's the playing situation going to shake out behind Madison?
Sure.
Yeah, that's one of the bigger question marks when it comes to the Vikings right now. Is how that usage for that backfield is going to unfold. And a lot of people are thinking, hey, Madison's going to take over this Dalvin Cook role. He's going to get 75% of the usage in that backfield. That I don't buy into. Obviously, I'm a guy that's looked at a lot of the efficiency numbers over the last couple of years with Madison declining, and I think that's a situation where the numbers are declining. Kind of indicates that that's going to be a situation where he's not really going to provide a tremendous amount of production. I think that's going to be situations where it will pull him off the field more so than we might be thinking right now, to where a guy like Chandler and McBride might come in.
Do you think? I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I've got Ty Chandler as a late round flyer in some of these leagues that we've drafted so far.
Right.
The more you're hearing, reports in camp, I'm wondering if they don't go out and try to sign one of these running backs here on the cheap. Like, I feel like that would make sense. I mean, the Vikings are a contender. I mean, it's either going to be them. It's either going to be them or the Lions. To me, is the top two teams in that division there. I mean, do you roll with Madison there and let's just call it a day? I mean, I feel like one of these veteran backs would come in there and at least provide a little, a little insurance there, right?
Yeah, there's always that thought. I mean, they've kind of entertained a little bit of the thought with bringing in, working out some running backs over the course of the last week and a half. That was a landing spot that I was really concerned that Kareem Hunt was going to land into. Being a passing down, third down back in Minnesota, Madison taking to the early down work, just because of the camp reports you were hearing. Ty Chandler and Ngannou both struggling with pass protection. That's a situation where if they're not covering on third down, then that's putting Madison on the field more, which is also going to lead into more situations where he can potentially be hurt, and you're losing Madison from your fantasy rosters at that point too. So it's a little bit concerning. I mean, we've talked about it over the course of the last few weeks. You've still got that, that trio is out there of running backs right now with Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, and Kareem Hunt, who's been on a whirlwind tour this week, with the Saints almost signing, leaves to go to Indianapolis, has the visit there, leaves Indianapolis without a deal, and now we've not heard anything since. I mean, now you got
right off the bat.
And now you've also got Dalvin Cook, who's still dangling out there as well, the aforementioned former back of the Vikings. He visited with the Jets 2 weekends ago, and now at this point, we've not heard anything new out of that situation either. So
sure.
Now
I feel like over the next week or two, we're gonna see these guys sign. I think a lot of it, though, honestly, these guys don't want to be in camp. I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
We got DJ Dallas out there starting out. No Zach Charbonnet.
Smart.
So who knows if we're going to even see him at all? But we got DJ Dallas out there to start along with our boy Drew Lock.
Yes, the Drew Lock show. Yeah, that's definitely an encouraging sign that he's still putting out that production for the Seattle Seahawks. But no, so I mean, that's kind of where we're at with these free agent running backs. Is you're still wait and see mode. You mentioned, they might not want to go into training camp, put their bodies on the line. We've got that line drawn in the sand between the running backs and front offices right now. How much and how valuable do they really consider themselves to be? And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a negotiating tactic for some of these running backs. Is I'm not going to come to camp. I'll be willing to sign a deal last minute, but these guys are veterans. I mean, they've been through the rigors of camp over the course of the last few years. And it's the same situation we used to see with Favre every single year. Hey, I'm going to retire, and then show up the week before the regular season starts. And it's kind of a similar situation here now. So I think that's what we're about to see with Dalvin Cook, especially. I figure that's coming around the pike within the next week or two. We're both hoping still for the Miami Dolphins to come in. Rumor was that they were ready to up an offer and get back in the game with Dalvin Cook after he visited with the Jets. I'm of the contention that I thought that visit with the Jets was a lot more of a, hey, look, I might sign with the Jets, but I'd rather play with the Dolphins. I need you guys to up that offer, and I'll come down there. I think that was kind of what that thought process was there. So we'll see how that plays out. But
I mean, the Jets are currently kicking the tires on a running back, though. So I mean, that just to me that really goes into how much confidence they have in Breece Hall coming back at least at 100% to start.
Well, I mean, but a lot of that talk of the running backs that they were going to work out and brought in Dalvin Cook for that workout and the visit during that weekend was before the Hall of Fame game. And then we saw during the Hall of Fame game, Izzy Abanikanda did not look too bad. I mean, he flashed some potential on the field that night, albeit against second and third string defense guys for the Browns. But since that game, we've not really heard the Jets in on running back. Haven't heard much talk with Dalvin Cook since that visit. I mean, they could be set. I mean, get a positive report on Breece Hall. You've still got Michael Carter, whatever that's worth to this point.
Sure.
You've still got Zonovan Knight, who flashed big at the end of last year for a lot of guys that picked him up off the waiver wire. So there's depth there, whether it be good or not. There's still some depth there for the Jets. But, you know, we saw like this last week, they just started with Hard Knocks. And that team does feel like they're on the cusp. The window's open. They can compete this year with Aaron Rodgers.
It's going to close quick. They better hurry.
Yeah, well,
that's why I say that's why I think they're going to bring in a running back here at some point, because that window is tight, and they are not going to trust that to a rookie, a second-year guy like Zonovan Knight, or a third-year guy like Michael Carter, who's been okay, but let's face it, I don't think when he gets into postseason football, I don't think he's going to be the kind of guy that's going to be leading you to a title.
No, not at all. But we'll stay on the running back topic and get into, you know, the topic and the hotly contested debate that struck Twitter today, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles backfield situation. Report come about today, a lot of camp talk, some beat writer putting out the information that Kenny Gainwell is essentially the guy that is the RB1 for the Eagles right now, based on early indications from camp. He's getting the most touches. He's out there with the ones the most, followed by, I believe, Rashad Penny is the guy with the second most touches, followed by DeAndre Swift, who's strictly been used in a third down role, pass catching back situation so far in camp, from what his eyes have seen. Obviously, it depends on how you want to frame your argument for this situation. Does that cause you a little bit of pause with guys like Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift? Does that raise the potential value of a Kenny Gainwell? I've seen the pendulum swinging so far to each degree today. What's your take on this Eagles backfield situation right now?
All a bunch of talk. We've seen, even if that's true, I don't think it is. Even if that's true, by the way, thank you to the guy that put that out ahead of some of the drafts.
Yes.
You know that's going to affect crap. No, I think it's a bunch of talk. Even if Kenny Gainwell is that guy, they are the kind of backfield that they are going to split things up. So to me, it really doesn't matter who the lead back is, because they are going to spread things out so much. Go back to that backfield last year. You know, I mean, Miles Sanders was really good, but how many times did Kenny Gainwell come in there and get some action? How many times did Boston Scott come in there and get some action? Granted, Miles Sanders finally put it together for 1 year, and now he's gone. So, I mean, you've got guys that have been, you know, good fantasy backs in Penny and DeAndre Swift. But it's one of those things, like, we've seen Kenny Gainwell before. I don't know that he is necessarily going to be able to be that lead dog number one guy in that offense. So for me, it's a bunch of fodder. So thank you to the guy. Thank you to the guy that put that out there, because I'm sure it's going to jumble things up and probably get Gainwell drafted a lot higher than probably what he should be.
Well, I mean, even from a different perspective, if you even go back to last year's training camp, Miles Sanders was the third most used back in preseason rotational drills in that backfield last summer. Boston Scott was the second most utilized running back in that backfield during drills last summer in training camp as well. And again, Kenny Gainwell was the guy that was number one as far as usage in training camp. So it's
we saw what happened last year with that.
Right. And this was the thing. We had quite the back and forth in a group message with a lot of the Rotoballer writers today and on Twitter, X, whichever we want to call it. I'm going to still call it Twitter. But
yeah, there was until I can't retweet something instead of re-exit, it's Twitter.
Yeah. So like I pointed out today in that group message and kind of some of the back and forth we were having, is the way I'm looking at it is you've got two running backs that you've brought in, one via a trade during the NFL draft. Also, then one you've paid an actual contract to in Rashad Penny. Both are known to be somewhat health risks. Why would you put a lot of workload on these guys in training camp to risk injury in meaningless times, as opposed to the fact of where you want them healthy for actual games? You know what you've got with these running backs, and you know how they're going to slot in and how they're going to be used in the offense. Whereas opposed to Kenny Gainwell, you're just giving him more reps. He's the dependable back in that backfield. They're used to him. They know what they've got in him. And so that's what they're using with Kenny Gainwell, as opposed to keeping Penny and keeping DeAndre Swift kind of off to the side. Give them a little bit of work here and there, just kind of keeping their legs stretched out somewhat like that. But that's how I'm viewing it. Yeah, I think the coaching staff is being smart and not overusing them in training camp. Because we've already seen it. You know, there's a lot of guys that are coming off the field, groin injuries with, say, Kenneth Walker, if we're staying in this game that's on the television right now, already with a groin injury. We've got guys, Cooper Kupp, coming off the field with a hamstring injury. Soft tissue injuries are happening left and right in training camp early on. So why would you risk it with two guys that are very, like I said, high risk of injury type players in Penny and Swift? So that's how I'm viewing that situation. I think we're safe. I think we know what we're getting and how that backfield, to me, I think I know how that backfield rotation is going to look come the regular season. I think it's going to be Rashad Penny taking the early down work. He's going to be the guy that's going to be on the field, you know, between the 20s. DeAndre Swift is going to be the third on back, pass catching back, but he's also going to mix in and be a rotational kind of a satellite back and spell Penny from time to time. And I think Gainwell's going to continue to keep that role of, you know, the high leverage touch guy, possibly, you know, some of the, you know, 2-minute drill type work, things like that. But I think he's the clear three behind the other two, as opposed to what we're seeing out of this report that came out today.
No, I'm going to agree. I mean, Penny's the guy that I think is going to, at the end of the year, have the biggest percentage of work in that backfield.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, like you said, it's a lot of talk early on. Obviously, we are in depth chart overreaction territory. You know, a couple days ago, Bijan Robinson being listed as the RB3 with the Falcons caused quite the stir on Twitter as well. So we're definitely in that training camp overreaction period right now. You know, guys putting out reports left and right, and it's causing a lot of just scarcity on Twitter to a lot of people that probably had a little bit of concern with certain players, and it's just giving them kind of more of a leverage to speak out on their takes. I think is what we're looking at right now. So, like you mentioned, that report coming out, I think it's that you're probably going to, in the short term, going to see a little bit of adverse ADP reaction with that.
Absolutely.
I mean, both Penny and Swift have been great buying opportunities, even at what their current ADP is right now. And if they just slide down the board even more, I mean, those guys are easily two players that you can pick up at a great value in drafts. It's not like you're going to go out and draft a Kenneth Gainwell right now. As much as I like Kenneth Gainwell, University of Memphis product right down the road, but he's not the starter for the Philadelphia Eagles. We need to pump the brakes, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, and I mean, if you've listened to this podcast before, there's been all kind of news coming out, and I feel like that's one of the things you and I can help people do is not listen to this coming on. Like you hear all this talk. Oh, Saquon Barkley, don't draft him. He's going to sit out the season. What do we tell you?
Nah, he's coming back.
He's coming back. Same thing with Jonathan Taylor. He's coming back. The only person I'm really worried about is Josh Jacobs. And let's face it, with the running back market the way it is right now, that's probably not going to happen either. So draft confidently. Same thing with Kenneth Gainwell right now. He's not going to be the lead back. Even if he starts and he is the first person out there taking a snap on game one out there, he's still not going to be a fantasy relevant back in comparison to these other two guys. So again,
very, very true.
Read through the lines. Don't buy
drown out the noise. There's a lot of static out there. Drown out the noise is what we continue to preach as we are in fantasy football draft month. The closer you get towards September, I think that's when a lot more of the nerves pick up too. So drown it out, move forward confidently in your drafts is definitely the thing. So moving on, we're going to recap and talk about my Flex League draft that took place this last weekend. Defending champ, going back up to New York City. Just did the draft this last weekend on SiriusXM and putting up the draft board for everybody to view as we're looking at it right now. So I drafted from the 12 spot. Obviously, this is an experts draft. A lot of heavy hitters in this draft. Jake Seeley's in this draft. Jamie Eisenberg's in this draft. A lot of guys that are well-known entities in the fantasy football industry mixed in with this draft. So I go from the 12 spot, and what I was expecting to happen was probably exactly what happened coming into this draft, and it went very, very running back heavy in the first round, as opposed to what we've seen a lot in some of the regular underdog drafts and things like that, is where a lot of teams are going very wide receiver focused in the first 2 to 3 rounds. This one, half point PPR. So you're starting 3 wide receivers, of course, but that half point PPR brings a lot more of the value and the production closer for the running back. So it's a lot more vital to go after your running backs early. So starting off, first pick, obviously, Jefferson, Chase were the first 2 off the board, as far as McCaffrey as well. That's kind of your typical first 3 off the board, depending on how you want to rotate and filter those guys in certain drafts. But the first question mark right out of the gate, Andrew Erickson with Fantasy Pros, Bijan Robinson at pick 4, probably the first surprise of the draft at pick 4. How do you feel about Bijan at 1-4 in the first round?
I mean, I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. I mean, if he thinks that Austin Eckler is going to have a little bit of a downturn, you got Cooper Kupp with a slight injury risk over there. I don't hate it. Look, it's somebody trying to make, a splash pick in there with a guy that they think is going to lead the backfield. I get it. I don't know that I'd make the move, but I've been in some underdog draft where Bijan has gone 1 or 2. I mean,
right.
It's not incredibly uncommon. So, but I think to me, again, you're the guy that's in this draft here. You've got some experts in there with you. I think the biggest takeaway from these drafts, granted, again, we're at a half point PPR, not a full point. To me, the thing that I'm looking at and the thing that I want to pay attention to is this: where are the guys ranked at? Where are the running backs ranked at? Where do I have them ranked at? Where do the wide receivers go? Like, not necessarily paying attention to, what team is looking the best of this draft, but I want to pay attention to where some of these guys are going. Who is a guy like Jake Seeley taken early? Brandon, who are you taking early? You're seeing right here quarterbacks going in the 4th and the 5th round. You got a guy like Joe Burrow, who, by all accounts should be, a top 4 quarterback, taking just a little bit of a dip here, maybe with the injury news. So those are the kind of things that I'm paying attention to when I look at a draft like this. Somebody like me that I wasn't involved. I paid attention to your draft and everything, and we'll get into your specific draft here. But I want to pay attention to where the guy's going, who's some sleepers, who's some guys that are falling to where I can take that back into my draft and turn that into hopefully some fantasy gold.
True. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of it's more of a practice more than anything is looking at a board like this and getting kind of a take, like you mentioned, of experts that are in the industry, how they're viewing a draft board, guys that they like more than others. Like Jake Seeley goes, from the 1-7 spot, he takes Saquon Barkley over Nick Chubb, who Nick Chubb is a guy that I've got ranked ahead of Saquon Barkley. There's a lot of factors that come into play with that pick. Obviously, Jake Seeley is a big Saquon Barkley fan. He's got a dog that's named Barkley, so take that with a grain of salt there. But Chubb was the guy going into the draft. I at the tail end of the first round, like I mentioned, I'm drafting from the 12th spot. I had 3 guys that I was really wanting to get my hands on with the 2 picks to wrap that turn at 1-2. And that was Nick Chubb, that was Tony Pollard, and that was Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those were the 3 guys that I was seriously considering. And like we mentioned on the podcast last week, it put me in a position being at the end where I had to really take a stand and go get my guys. I'm going to reach for players more than I would had I been drafting from the 6th, 7th, 8th spot. At that point, I'm going to take guys that this is where I've got them ranked. I'm going to go ahead and take them here. I don't have to reach. But as opposed to that, I'm looking at the board and the way things are coming. We just mentioned Bijan at 4, and the way that the first round wrapped up, you got Eckler at 5, Tyreek Hill at 6, Barkley at 7, Chubb at 8, Cooper Kupp falls all the way to pick 1-9 to Eric Young. Travis Kelce falls all the way to 110, going to Chris Towers from CBS Sports. Alfredo Brown digs me in the heart there with the Tony Pollard snipe right in front of me, and then I wrap up the first round with Derrick Henry. Mark that down as 2 straight years, Derrick Henry in the first round for me. So I went back to the well with Derrick Henry, won me a championship last year. So the way I viewed it, obviously running backs are coming off the board hot and heavy, and I'm at a point there at that spot in the draft in the first round. You've got that clear first, second tier of running backs. Derrick Henry is probably the last on the tier for me. So I wanted to go ahead and sure up and get my RB1 there with Derrick Henry, because as opposed to that, then who am I going to take? Am I going to take a Jonathan Taylor? Am I going to take a Josh Jacobs? Not that early. I don't like that pick there. That wouldn't have been right. I would not have felt confident in that. Obviously, another direction I could have gone is gone back-to-back wide receiver. I could have gone Diggs and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But the way that you really compete in this league is you do need those running backs. You do need that depth and that value at the position to really be able to compete on a week-in, week-out basis. And that's how I attacked this draft here. So as you're looking at the board, second round went St. Brown, Diggs, Jacobs, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, C.D. Lamb, Jonathan Taylor, which we just mentioned, big question mark on him right now, injury situation, hold out, hold in. Then you had Jalen Waddle, Ramondre Stevenson, Jahmyr Gibbs sneaking into the back end of the second round, Joey Wright. That's one of his guys. And kind of similar to me, he went and got one of his guys. And then Chris Olave to round out round 2. So kind of a little bit more of the return to norm in the second round. You had more wide receivers going into that round. Obviously, I kind of started off that run with Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 2-1. So that's when things start to kind of change. This is when you start seeing strategies come into play after the first 2 rounds. Yeah, Mark Andrews is a guy that's going 3rd round. He goes to Andrew Erickson there at the 3-4. And then, like you mentioned, right here at the end of round 3, you got Josh Allen taken by Alfredo Brown right there in front of me at the 3-11. I was not considering Jonathan Allen at that point, but at that point, I'm reading the room as well, and I'm looking around, and I kind of get a feeling for the board, and that's when I go Dameon Pierce to wrap up round 3, but then I do come back and I go Patrick Mahomes to start round 4. So if you look at the board, after I take Patrick Mahomes over the course of the next round and a half, 2 rounds, that's when most of the top tier quarterbacks come off the board. So I feel like I made a great move and a great selection with Mahomes there at that point. I get a guy that's going to be elite quarterback for me week in and week out. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not going to question decisions. That's start sit decision at that point, and it pays off because I do get a guy ahead of the run, and that's really what you really want to do when you're at the turns at the 1 or the 12. You want to be out in front of a run, and I think that's what I accomplished there. How do you feel looking at the board, gauging how these runs happen left and right on each side of the board? You feel like Pat Thorman at the 1 spot on the other side, as opposed to how I attacked the board on the other end at the 12, you see 2 different types of strategies there. How do you feel that they played out?
Yeah, I mean, being able to get a guy like Deshaun Watson, if you can get him in round, what is that, 8, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, what is the difference between getting a Jerry Jeudy and adding that to your roster and having Deshaun Watson as your quarterback, or getting a guy like Mahomes? If you want to get one of those top quarterbacks, which we've seen from this last year, you really need a guy that's going to finish in the top 5 to be anywhere decent. I mean, even if you're in a 1 QB league like this, great, and you only need one guy, but I'm in the years past, I feel like I could always wait on quarterback, and that's always been my strategy. Usually, going into this year, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I feel like I want to come away with one of those top guys. So with that in mind, I mean, I definitely think you came away with one of those top guys. A guy like a Deshaun Watson, I think is going to be good, but he didn't exactly have a great year last year. Granted, he had been away from the game for a couple of years. So, if you think you're going to get a guy like Watson or Dak Prescott or Tua, I mean, guys there are going to have some questions. The guys at the top don't really have those same question marks as some of those guys, toward that 9, 10, 11, 12 mark. So, I'd much rather be in your spot, but this is what we're looking at. What is the price? What is the payoff of getting one of those top quarterbacks? And I think you see, that stark difference where, your wide receivers are definitely not, as strong as what his would be. So, but you see that difference there, and you got to figure out how you want to build your team. So
that's true. Yeah. And like you mentioned, with the quarterbacks coming up the board a lot more, and they're coming off the board earlier in drafts this year. We started seeing it last year. I can even speak from experience in doing these expert drafts over the years, is going back as far as, let's say, 3 to 4 years ago. It was pretty well known in the room as we were getting into the draft, is that your quarterbacks weren't going to really come off the board until round 6, 7. Most of the time, round 8, 9 is where you start to see the guys kind of coming off the board at quarterback. But now this year, that value is pushed up the board. The quarterbacks are coming off the board earlier. Heck, the last time I won, prior to last year, the last time I won flex, my first flex title, I took Patrick Mahomes in the 16th round. He was my number 2 quarterback that year. And that was the year he was the full-time starter, his first full year as the starter. So that's kind of just to give you a stark difference as far as this quarterback values over the years. But like you mentioned, I mean, I did go get Mahomes early. I got him ahead of the run at the detriment and the sacrifice of what I could have depth-wise at the wide receiver position.
Sure.
That's definitely something I had to look at.
And that's why, I think, and you would probably say the exact same thing. I mean, you need to know a couple things going into your drafts here. And that's what we're preparing for right now. You need to go to the guys in your, if you know the guys in your room, we're getting ready to go to Kentucky next weekend, and bring you some live coverage from the SBFFC up there. Some of the guys we know, but where I know your draft strategy, I know exactly what you're going to do, or I like to think I at least have an idea what you're going to do.
Maybe
some of these guys we've been drafting with for a couple of years here, but you don't know what they're going to do. So I feel like it's one of those things you can prepare all you want to, but I think it's doing mock drafts. It's preparing yourself, knowing where the runs are, knowing where, hey, I really need to go attack this position because it gets pretty pretty skimpy after this.
Right.
Again, that's where I look at a draft like this and see kind of some of the strategies that I would do, because you get an expert draft like this and you're going to see a bunch of different strategies. And, I like to look at it and see, what would I have done here? What would I have done if I was in your shoes, and see what's going to be available out there. So, one of the things we do in the SBFFC and some of our drafts is we actually pick our draft position. You use free agent dollars to be able to pick. We're a week out. I normally am toward the tail end. I'm normally at 9 or 10. I don't know where I want to be this year. Like, I have no clue. So, it's one of those things, starting out, I think it just takes a lot of practice. You got to go in, and hit some of these drafts up and figure out, what is your strategy going to be for the year?
Right. Exactly. And so that's definitely a different practice and different build than what I've had in some other drafts up until this point. With this draft in the Flex League this last weekend. Another point I kind of wanted to make too is another run that I kind of possibly missed out on, but I was able to get the guy at the tail end of the tier. It's Dallas Goedert at tight end, that to finish off round 7. In the mold of, do you want to go get your guys? Obviously, Darren Waller is one of my guys. I debated on the round at round 6 where I went Brandon Ayuk. Did I want to go ahead and get Darren Waller because I didn't think he would make it back to me? And obviously I was right there, but to my benefit, I was able to get a guy like Goddard, who still should be heavily involved in that Philadelphia Eagles offense this year, even as the third option in the passing game. I still think that touchdown upside is there with a Goddard. So I was smart to go ahead and get him there. But like I just mentioned, as you look through the rest of my roster after that, Dalvin Cook, who, again, hammering the Dalvin Cook value right now, getting him in round 8. If he signs with Miami, I've got him in the Scott Fish Bowl too. I mean, I've got a guy there. He's my RB4 in this league. I think he's my RB3 in the Scott Fish Bowl. Potential guy that's going to put up close to fringe RB1 numbers in a Dolphins offense if that's where he signs. And I'm giving him super late.
Even if he doesn't sign there, I mean, if he signs with the Jets, I mean, if he signs in a spot that just does not have an alpha dog number 1, there, he's going to put up, good numbers and give you some return there. He just is. He's that kind of running back there. So no, I like that. I like that pick.
And then I did go ahead and get Sky Moore, who I am high on this year, to pair with Patrick Mahomes. So I got a little bit of a stack there. I know you're not, but even behind that, I did get Rashee Rice. So I'm banking on the fact that one of those two guys are going to take off, because all I need is a bona fide starting set of 3 wide receivers. I think I'm very confident in the fact that I got Amon-Ra St. Brown, who potentially is a top 5 guy at the position. Brandon Ayuk, who I believe is going to put up most of the time wide receiver 2 numbers in certain weeks. It might be a little bit inconsistent week in, week out, but I think come year's end, I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be pushing as a wide receiver 2 in that offense. So I'm fairly confident in those 2. And then that's why I just hammered wide receiver for a few rounds in a row there. Is I'm looking for depth of guys that I can plug in at that wide receiver 3 on a week in and week out basis. We'll see how it plays out. There's certain guys that I was obviously targeting. You mentioned, the aforementioned Nico Collins. He goes, I was expecting him to go kind of in round about 11. Goes mid round 10 there. Then there's a lot of these other guys that you're on the end like I am at 12. You're going to miss out on some of these players that are going to go kind of in the middle of the round when you're just taking a risk. That's just how the ball game is with these experts drafts, especially. But I was listening in on Chris Meaney's podcast on FTN's network on YouTube earlier today. He was kind of covering his draft earlier today as well. He started off with Nick Chubb, Garrett Wilson, and Amari Cooper. But to agree with him, me and him both were kind of talking about it a little bit during the draft too. I was talking about it with Alfredo at the draft. Jamie Eisenberg had a pretty strong draft, the way things shook out for him as well. He went Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Najee Harris, Calvin Ridley, J.K. Dobbins, he got the value of Joe Burrow in the 6th round, like you mentioned, possibly falling down the board with a little bit of the injury risks. James Cook, possibly post hype sleeper in Gabe Davis this year. Zach Charbonnet, Jamison Williams, Roshan Johnson, Dalton Kincaid, Dalton Schultz, the double Daltons. So I like his team. I like what he put together there. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be strong and compete during the year this year. But there you have it. I mean, that's flex draft. Definitely got a different feel on this team as opposed to last year. Leaving the draft last year, I think I liked my team a little bit more last year leaving the draft than I do with this particular team.
I told you last year after your draft, I thought you were going to be really good and compete.
But here's the thing. When it was all said and done, I had left with Leonard Fournette in round 2. Yuck. Come season in. Round 4 or 5, I believe, is when I took Cortland Sutton.
And did you say you got
double yuck?
You said you got Derrick Henry in that draft too, right?
Derrick Henry in round 1.
He played through the year, but I mean, he didn't finish the year either.
No, he did not play championship week, so I had to scramble there. But obviously last year I got guys that were really a little bit unheralded last year, and Kenneth Walker fairly late, who obviously with injury to Rashad Penny took off. But Devin Singletary, and I mentioned it at the flex draft to a lot of people, is Devin Singletary, for the flack that he was catching in that offense with Buffalo last year, was extremely valuable. So now that's something to keep in mind with a James Cook coming into this year and the value that he possibly presents in that backfield. So that's definitely something to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at potential values, middle rounds, late rounds of the draft, especially at the running back position. But that's that puts a wrap on that. We're going to see. We'll keep a tab on this throughout the year. We'll keep up with how I'm doing, how this flex league is going. Can I repeat with this team that I put together this last weekend? Remains to be seen, to be continued, ladies and gentlemen. So let's get back to what we're really here to talk about. And we want to jump into some tight end discussion. We've gone through
our favorite spot.
The last few weeks, we've gone through and given you a draft plan at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver last week. And we're touching on the tight ends this week. Obviously, the name everyone knows about, and the guy that's going in the first round is Travis Kelce. Current ADP on Fantasy Pros is at 6th overall. And you're looking at a guy last year, 110 receptions, nobody even close. 24 receptions behind is where you find TJ Hawkinson. So he is a class among himself at the tight end position. That ADP at 6. How comfortable are you with Travis Kelce, and where is your range on where you're willing to pull the trigger in the first round on him?
I think right about that 5-6 spot. I mean, you figure that, it's going to be Jefferson and Chase, McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan, and I think that's when you got to start considering at that point. You got Cooper Kupp mixed in there. You got some of the other running backs that you could be potentially looking at, but Travis Kelce is a difference maker. I mean, he is a guy that is going, the leagues that I had Travis Kelce in last year, I won titles in. So I can't say that about too many other guys. So, I mean, it's that positional difference that you get with Travis Kelce. The one thing that I'm worried about is he is getting a little up there.
Yep.
He's over that 30 mark. So that downturn is coming at some point, but I don't think it's this year.
No. I obviously, with a little bit of the question marks with the other receivers in that rotation, that's something to definitely kind of keep an eye on. I think similar situation with Derrick Henry, and I mentioned it over the course of the last couple of weeks on this podcast, is I think Derrick Henry, I think we're looking at the last potentially great year from a fantasy production season with Derrick Henry. This could be the last great year of production that we get out of Travis Kelce. in this offense. Like you mentioned, age could be a contributing factor. So that's something to keep in mind. But obviously, he's a first-round pick. It's just a matter of where you're really willing to take him in your drafts. I think the ADP at 6 is kind of around about right as far as how I'm viewing him right now. But from that point forward, Mark Andrews ADP right now is number 2 guy on Fantasy Pros, number 2 on my board as well. 27, number 2 in my heart, but number 27th overall on the board. So getting all the way into the 3rd round. So you've got a big gap there between tight end 1 to tight end 2. And if you look at the numbers, obviously I just mentioned the reception numbers differences there. I mean, second, you've got a Mark Andrews now in the, let's say, Brock Bowers role for the Todd Monken led offense for the Ravens this year.
Not the Darnell Washington role.
Not the Darnell Washington role, no. So 3rd round Mark Andrews. I'm going to take a guess here that you're not in on Mark Andrews in the 3rd round.
You'd be guessing correct.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I like Mark Andrews. There's nothing wrong with getting Mark Andrews there. In a lot of the drafts that I've seen, he's been going in round 2. Early half of round 3, there's just guys that I like better that I'd rather spend my draft capital on.
Right.
It's not to say I don't think that Mark Andrews is not going to have a good year. I think he will. I just like guys better. If he trickles in the latter half of round 3, early round 4, that's when I start to take a look. But I think some of the guys that are ranked just after Mark Andrews, I think are going to have similar years to where I think the difference in that price is not going to be as big as the difference in price between that running back or wide receiver that you miss out on in round 2, round 3 there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a little bit of a down year last year for Andrews. Sub 200 fantasy points, goes 190.5 last year. 65.2% catch rate, 847 on the receptions. But the biggest thing with him last year is the 5 touchdowns. That was a little bit of a cause for concern. Those touchdown numbers have to come back up if he's a guy you're taking, late round 2, early round 3. That number has to come back up.
Yeah, and I think it will.
Right.
You've got Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson was hurt for a good amount of the year this last year. Not exactly in a great passing offense. You got Monken coming in. You forget he had another Pro Bowl quarterback in the backfield.
Steve Trace, don't reach for Andrews. We agree with you there.
Steve, did you reach for Andrews in the fishbowl there with us? I can't remember. I don't have the draft board up in front of me.
But yeah. More with Andrews.
No, again, I think it's one of those things though, where I think they're going to be passing the ball a little bit more. I think he is going to be the number 1 target in that offense. It's just he is going to have the kind of year he had a couple of years ago for you to be able to.
He took Kelsey number 1 in your league.
He may have been he was in your league.
That's right. He was in my league. Yeah, that's right.
I was going to say because Alex Gilstrap took him at 3 overall in ours. Okay,
right.
Got it.
Got you.
It's definitely one of those things to where I think Andrews is going to be the number 1 target. I just don't know that I like giving up that draft capital in that round, in that area. I'd much rather get that wide receiver running back that I think is going to produce even more, and I think I could find that tight end in further rounds after that. So that's right.
And speaking of that, I mean, we take another jump when you go to tight end 3, and TJ Hawkinson goes all the way to ADP of 47. So right there towards the end of round 4 now is where we're looking. So another gap there where, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to see TJ Hawkinson push Andrews for that number 2 tight end at the end of this year. We saw him heavily involved when that Vikings offense after the trade from Detroit last year.
Sure.
I was the number 2 tight end last year with targets, 123. Was the number 2 tight end in receptions with 86. It's 3rd at the position, actually 4th at the position with 6 touchdowns on the season last year. That's 914 on the receiving yards for Hawkinson in 2022. Possibly what you're probably going to see with Hawkinson again this year. It's kind of a repeat of similar type numbers, I think, is what I would expect for him. So keeping that in mind, do you think that 47 ADP towards the end of round 4 is correct value? And would you be interested at that point?
That is about the kind of spot that I'm starting to get interested at going and dipping in that tight end well there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I mentioned finding similar value in later rounds. Hawkinson is a guy that, was quite good toward the end over there. So it's like Steve mentioned there, he's not that far behind. When he moved into that, and it's kind of weird because Goff finished last year with such a good year that you would think that Hawkinson would have been a little bit more involved in that passing offense. But old Kirky Cousins loved him some Hawkinson, and especially now with Thielen gone, there is targets to be had in that offense. So again, you're going to look at a guy like KJ Osborne, who I think is going to be a little bit of a sleeper this year. You got Addison coming in there. Addison's going to fill the void on some of those targets there. But, you got those targets early in the year that Thielen had that I think, for me, I think Hawkinson is the number 2 option in that passing offense. You're going to see the ball thrown a whole lot more, I think, than you did this last year with Dalvin Cook in that offense too. So Hawkinson is that's right around the spot that I'm starting to kind of perk my ears up a little bit at a tight end.
Yeah, and I think that's you picked up on kind of the perfect point there. Is I think second year with Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings offense, Dalvin Cook now out of the mix. We're probably looking at a passing game uptick for the Vikings this year. Defense, they've lost some pieces on defense. So you're probably going to be a situation where game script wise, they're going to have to throw, and to stay competitive, they're going to have to throw. It's going to put the ball in the hands of obviously Justin Jefferson, but then after that, you've got the targets of Adam Thielen leaving town. How well can Jordan Addison mix in automatically? It remains to be seen. But Hawkinson's definitely a guy that seems like he's already the reliable number 2 option in that passing attack. So definitely a guy that's at that point, like you mentioned, I think that's where I'm starting to look at tight end myself. But after that, that's when you start to kind of sprinkle in the run on the tight ends from the ADP perspective. You got George Kittle's at 51. Kyle Pitts is tight end 5 currently on Fantasy Pros at 67. My guy, Darren Waller, tight end 6. I've actually got him ranked at tight end 4 right now on rotoballer.com. Going at 69. Dallas Goedert, tight end 7 at 70 ADP.
And then, pause right there real quick.
Yeah.
So if it's me in these drafts, I want one of these front 7 tight ends.
Correct.
This is that mark right here, where if you get one of these 7 guys that we just listed, I feel way more comfortable about my team than I do if I have any of these other guys that are listed here. The question marks on your team go way up. And Brandon will tell you, if you do not have a good tight end on your team and a guy that's given consistent production week in, week out, it is way harder to compete. And that's where a team like an owner with Travis Kelce is going to see that uptick. You need to build those points up because you got a guy like Kelce that's averaging 12 a week, but you're getting your tight end that you have and I'm just going to throw a name out that's toward the next one on the list, Tyler Higbee, that's only throwing 6. That's a touchdown a week you're losing on just the tight end position. So it's definitely for me in my drafts, I want to make sure that I try to have one of these 7 guys on my team.
Yeah, that's the clear top tier at the position, obviously. But if you look at kind of ADP elsewhere, at running back in this range that's currently coming off the board, you're looking at guys like Javonte Williams at running back at 61, Rachaad White at 65, James Conner at 63. These are all guys that are going to mix in at possibly an RB2 for you. Are you comfortable going with those type of names as your RB2, or do you want to go ahead and solidify your tight end 1? Wide receiver in this range, you're looking at guys like Chris Godwin, 64, Mike Williams at 62, Drake London at 60, Christian Kirk at 71, Brandon Ayuk at 72, Tyler Lockett at 73. So that is, you're starting to get in that point in that range with the wide receiver position where it's a little bit, these guys are all about the same. Let me go ahead and get this top tier, more elite guy at the tight end position to go ahead and solidify that spot. So like that's the point you just mentioned. Go grab one of those top 7 guys.
Absolutely, 100%. And I mean, even go back and look at your flex draft. So where the average ADP on Fantasy Pros is listed right now has a higher ADP. The tight ends are going later in the draft, in you guys' draft there.
Yep.
That's not to say that that's going to be how it shakes out in the end in your home league draft, but I definitely want to be in the business of having a tight end and not have to worry about that. That is one of the I feel like I can find a running back, especially later on. I feel like I can find a wide receiver later on that I'm going to be able to throw that dart out. It is incredibly difficult to find a Greg Dulcich coming out of completely nowhere. And even still with a guy like Dulcich, being able to get a consistent production out of a guy like that. So again, it's incredibly difficult to find a guy coming out of nowhere and have the chance to be able to plug in and get consistent production week in, week out on your fantasy team. So do yourself a favor, get a top tight end.
Yeah, like you mentioned, some of the tight ends in the flex league draft did go kind of in that later 6th, 7th round. Home league drafts are different. Those guys you're probably going to see some of the tight ends go earlier in their home league drafts, but obviously the drafting patterns of guys that you've done leagues with for years. Obviously, we do in certain leagues that we're involved in as well. So it gives you more of a competitive edge to know where to start picking guys off the board, depending on the league and the format. Obviously tight end premium type scoring formats like we have with Scott Fishbowl. That's something to kind of keep in mind as well. How is the format going to change your drafting patterns? So that's obviously key when you're looking at your drafts. But after that, that's that top 7 we mentioned. Then you're going to get into getting in a lot of guys that are going to have some question marks. Evan Ingram now in kind of a busier, obviously receiving core situation with Jacksonville with the addition of Calvin Ridley. How's that going to shake out? They did pay him this offseason. He's my tight end in Scott Fishbowl. I'm okay with it just because I did miss out on those top 7 names. He's the next best option. Has less question marks surrounding him, I think, than the next guys that we're going to see coming off the board, rounding out the top 12. So at 9, you've got Pat Freiermuth coming off the board, ADP of 92. David Njoku at 96. And then we have a gap to finish out 11 and 12. You got Dalton Schultz, 119, tight end 11, tight end 12, Dalton Kincaid at an ADP of 118. I think that is way too high for a Dalton Kincaid personally. I do not have him anywhere near the top 12 as things currently stand. I've got him at tight end 16.
I got him at 17. Look at that.
There you go. But I do have a rookie tight end at 12 on my tight end board, though.
Oh.
Sammy Ballgame. Sammy Laporta takes over the TJ Hawkinson role in an offense that I believe is going to see an uptick in passing. I think Sammy Laporta is going to be a guy that you can grab absolutely late in drafts, because if you look at his ADP currently right now, 143, tight end 17 in Fantasy Pros. So that's, for me, a buying opportunity.
I'm going to disagree with you. How many times have you seen a rookie tight end come in and be able to do much of anything? Granted, if he's my backup tight end, cool. I'm sure he's going to have some weeks where he goes out there and responds, but all you got to do is go back and look at a guy like Kyle Pitts. How is that rookie campaign for everybody? Not very good. Rookie tight ends are very, very, very difficult to be able to project and get fantasy points out of. So I'm personally staying away. My thoughts on Evan Ingram. I am not an Evan Ingram fan. They've added way too many mouths to that offense for me to be in at that price and everything. David Njoku is another one of those guys too. I do not have him ranked as high as that may seem. My tight end 8 is Patty Freiermuth. I think he is carving out a role there. He and Kenny Pickett developed that a little bit last year, and I think you're going to see that go to the next level. And then we talked a little bit earlier about it, about the Houston receiving situation in there as well. But you've got a very tight end friendly offense there. And we usually know how rookie quarterbacks come in and do. They like to throw to that tight end. So I've got Dalton Schultz as my number 9 in this offense. I think he is going to be, if he's not the leading receiver, I think he's going to be the number 2 guy in there. I think he's going to have some passing volume to where, again, if you miss out on one of those top 7 guys, I think one of those two, Freiermuth, showed it in spurts, here over the last couple of years here, that he's a guy that can take that next step. So those are my next couple of guys there, right after that top 7 tier.
Yeah, we'll disagree on Dalton Schultz. I just don't see it.
I think you got burned last year, as did I, on Dalton Schultz.
Sure, different offense, different passing situation. Rookie quarterback. Obviously, the conception is that the rookie quarterbacks do like to lean on the quarterback or on the tight end position, but I think that's a case by case basis that you have to use with that. C.J. Stroud at Ohio State did not utilize the tight end very much. So I think that's kind of a thing where his eyes stay downfield and outward as opposed to over the middle and short. And depending on
tonight why that he needs to be looking in the middle and short.
Possibly.
Instead of out inside. Okay.
Yeah, possibly. We'll see how that shakes out. But it's a new coaching regime in Houston. So things could kind of shake out a little bit different. But if you go back and look over the last few years, there's really not been a tight end that's been worth anything in Houston as far as on a roster.
You are correct. But if you look at the combined numbers of those tight ends, now granted, we're under a different regime, so we can't say that. But if you look at Jordan Akins and Daniel Fells,
who had so much hype around him, Jordan Akins did, and just couldn't live up to it.
But I'm talking, and for a little bit OJ Howard there too. But if you look at the combined numbers of all those tight ends, it formed a tight end one. You just never knew who was going to do anything on whatever week it was in.
True.
But those guys usually are. That has been a very fantasy friendly offense to the tight end. It just hasn't had that one name.
I'll give you Dalton Schultz as a better best ball option at tight end than I would give you as a redraft option. I'll give you that. But that's where we have a difference in Dalton Schultz there, and that is okay. I've got Greg Dulcich at tight end 11 in my rankings.
As do I. And then at rounding out my top 12, rounding out my number 1 tight ends, got my boy from Chicago, Cole Kmet, who really, if you look at his first 4 or 5 weeks last year, he had some zeros, 0.0, as the guru would say, 0.0. And the man came on toward the end of last year. He wasn't T.J. Hawkinson, but he came on. Again, I think he's going to be in much that same role. He's going to be a red zone favorite there of Justin Fields. Again, that is my top 12 there. I've got Evan Ingram just outside at 13 and Joku at 14 there.
You may be surprised to hear this, but what tight end led the NFL in snaps played in 2022?
Oh, it's Cole Kmet.
Cole Kmet, 995, led by 30 over T.J. Hawkinson. So he's on the field constantly.
See the rest of that roster?
Yes. There's a reason he's on the field. But no, like you mentioned with Freiermuth a little bit ago, there's a little bit of a rapport developing late in the year between Kenny Pickett and Freiermuth. I think we saw a little bit of that with Justin Fields towards the end of the year last year. And it pays off that he's on the field as much as he is because he's valuable as a blocker, but he's also valuable as a pass catcher. And Justin Fields did develop some trust with him towards the end of the season last year. So I think that's something to build upon. I'd like that with Cole Kmet. He's my fringe guy at the end of tight end 1. I've got him at 13. So he's definitely a guy that I view as an interchangeable piece there. Like we mentioned, after the top 7, and this is something we talk about each and every year when it comes to the tight end position. After those top tier guys, you can put this guy in this week and tight end 18 in the next week, and they'll flop production back and forth. Those guys filter in so much.
Go back and look at your rankings last year. Who'd you have in your top 7? These exact same guys.
Basically.
It didn't change. It did not change. Like I really was. I was going back to even 2 years ago. It's these same guys. It's all the same guys. Nobody has really changed from this group. So that's why I say, it's not like we're seeing big changes year in, year out. Granted, these guys are going to start getting older. We're going to see some new blood, but at least for this year, I got nobody different.
Right. No, I agree with you. Those top 7 are interchangeable. After that point is where you really start to kind of ask yourself questions. You you're at that point you're gambling. And once you start getting into these guys in that 8 to top 20 range, per se, you're definitely wanting to draft 2 tight ends for sure.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
you're
I think
absolutely going to you're going to have to play the matchups week in and week out with these guys.
So for you, out of that, let's go since we've already talked about Barn Dalton Kincaid. Who is that guy, 15, 16 down to the rest of the board? Who is that one guy that's a dart through who you think could make a play into being a tight end 1?
Tyler Higbee.
Okay.
Tyler Higbee, obviously high volume guy. Last year, he's on the field for 882 snaps, targeted 104 times last year. And what's changed from last year to this year? Nothing.
They've gotten even worse at wide receiver.
Yes,
that's what's changed.
Cooper Kupp is still there, and you could make the argument that a lot of those targets came for Tyler Higbee after the Kupp injury when he was lost for the year. But he's still really the de facto number 2 option in that passing game for a team that we mentioned just last week when talking receivers will be passing quite often because the team is going to be bad. So opportunity share is going to be there. And he's a guy that right now Fantasy Pros has ranked at tight end 16. So
he's my number 10B.
Yeah, I've got him at 14. So I'm ahead of the markets with Higbee. I think, as I mentioned last week, ROI. He's definitely a guy that's going to be a return on investment in a positive manner type of tight end in 2023.
So I'm gonna go a little bit of a deeper dive in there, and we've been talking this guy up for a couple of years now. What is that squeak? Is that a dog toy?
Yes.
Agreed, Steve. Yeah, Higbee I think is a lock as a number 2 target there. For Stafford. And they're going to be down a lot too. And that's another reason I've got him as my number 10. But a guy that we've talked about for a while, I think he has finally landed in a good situation for him. A post-hype of the post-hype superstars at tight end, and that's Irv Smith. You go to a situation in the Bengals that, Hayden Hurst had a pretty good year. You go back to some of the other tight ends that Burrow's had, and they've had good, decent years. I think this is a year that, granted, Irv Smith's a little bit down the pecking order, but I think if you're playing that, hey, I'm not going to get one of these top 7 guys. If you're trying for a number 2, if you're playing the matchups there, Irv Smith could be a pretty good guy to be able to plug in there, depending on that week.
Definitely a guy that needs to stay on the field, has to stay healthy. He's burned me quite often over the last couple of years. So he's not a guy that I'm very ready to invest in drafts, but he's definitely a late round dart throw type of guy. I prefer him more, again, best ball as opposed to redraft. Just because
I'm surprised you didn't mention somebody else that you've been mentioning to me quite often that you've been mentioning on Twitter there a little.
We'll get to. We're about to get
okay.
To
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, we're about to get to that. Obviously, you're mentioning my guy that I've pounded the table on for months now, and that is Jake Ferguson with the Dallas Cowboys. Solidified as the tight end 1 right now. Let's be real about this situation. He's stepping into a role that Dalton Schultz has been in over the course of the last 2 to 3 years and has been valuable in that role.
Maybe not last year, but
not last year, but more because of the injury situation with Schultz last year. That played more of a factor than anything. But from a target share perspective, that tight end with the Dallas Cowboys has been a valuable situation over the course of the last 3 years. And Jake Ferguson's a guy that is free in drafts right now. You can get him wherever you want in those last rounds. And obviously is a guy that I think can push to be a tight end 1 just for the opportunity share that he can bring to you.
So do you have a guy again, same example. Do you have a guy inside, let's just say that top 20, top 18 that you are just not touching this year?
For me, technically that you could quantify Dalton Schultz at that, because I've got him ranked all the way down to tight end 20 right now.
Wow.
I just don't see it in that offense. I'm not a big fan. I think the guy that's taken the biggest hit over the last month is Chigakonkwo. He was a guy that I had inside the top 12 prior to Hopkins signing. After the Hopkins signing, I've dinged him a little bit. He's down to tight end 18 now for me. So I'm obviously behind the market with Okonkwo. He's Fantasy Pros tight end 13 right now. Not a lot. There's not been too much movement with him from an ADP standpoint. But for me, I don't think that there's going to be that much value as the third or fourth option in the passing game for the Titans, as opposed to what he would have been as the tight end 2 or the number 2 option there.
Correct. Yeah. No. I mean, I think you saw him. I think he's another one of those guys that he had some big games last year. But definitely without D-Hop being in tow there in Tennessee, I think he could have done some good things. I just don't necessarily see that ceiling for him like I once did. So he's down at number 17 for me.
And then my other guy that is the buying opportunity at the position for me, as far as guys that are ranked inside the top 24, Juwan Johnson, Fantasy Pros tight end number 20, ADP of 169. I have him currently at 15 at the position. I've had him as high as 11 in some of my rankings, but as things have kind of been filtering in and out, I've landed at 15 on him right now. Only has 66 targets, 42 receptions in 2022, 7 touchdowns. Obviously, they came in bunches. That's been the knot with Juwan Johnson. But I think he's going to be a player that can evolve into Derek Carr's Darren Waller with the Saints of this year. That's what I've viewed Juwan Johnson as. He's my number 1 tight end drafted on Underdog right now. I have a higher rostered percentage of Juwan Johnson than any other tight end currently, and that's at 50%.
It is not surprising. I'm sure he's your number. Let's be clear. He's your number 2 tight end.
In certain instances, yes. But
some he's your 1.
And some he's my 1 because I'm waiting. I do wait at the position because it's best ball. I feel like I can wait and grab 2 to 3 tight ends and get that production on a week in, week out basis.
Interesting. So mine is kind of my other one is kind of a little bit more of a 2-headed answer. So I really like the Arizona Cardinals tight end situation. I think if one of those 2 guys happen to get hurt, the other one would probably, for me, instantly be a top 15 tight end. I mean, you saw Zach Ertz was doing really well last year before the injury.
Prior to injury. Yep.
Correct. Yep. Trey McBride is a guy that I've hyped up for a little while now, that I think if he gets a chance, I think in dynasty formats, he's somebody you want to go out and go target, because I think he could be a nice option moving forward, because Zach Ertz is not going to be around forever. You just saw his wife retire the other day from women's soccer. So could he be far behind? I don't know. But if
he's
one
already
of those guys,
been dinged up in camp a little bit already too.
Correct.
So
and McBride has been too. But
sure.
But you have a situation to where that is a premium tight end position there, no matter who the quarterback is. So if one of these guys could take, the lead, position there, I think that's somebody to keep an eye on. Right now, it is Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz is non-injury. If he was not hurt right now, had Kyler Murray back there, he would probably be, for me, ranked a tight end 1. But that is not the case. So, but anyway, some situation to keep an eye on out there, especially if you're looking for a late round flyer. Zach Ertz is not a half bad number 2 tight end.
True. So then a couple other names I really kind of wanted to throw out there as far as perceived number 2 options right now. Obviously, Dawson Knox with the Bills. Dalton Kincaid, we know, got drafted. But a lot of the talk is that he's going to play a lot of that kind of that split out tight end type of position where Dawson Knox will still be on the field. So he should still garner some opportunity there. And again, he's a player right now that's free in drafts that you can get late. And then also Isaiah Likely. We've seen flashes with Likely in that offense with the Ravens over the course of last year, especially. But he's definitely a guy that, with the question marks at the wide receiver position right now, and with Monken's desire to throw more and Monken's love for the tight end position, the Ravens could operate a lot of 12 personnel with both Andrews and Likely on the field. So Likely is definitely a sleeper candidate that you can kind of stash at the end of your roster. Those two names are guys that I'm kind of looking at as very, very late guys that could be valuable at some point during the 2023 season.
I don't think it's likely that Likely will be a likely top candidate unless Andrews gets hurt. Look, that's when he was valuable last year. When Andrews was hurt, Likely was a top guy. So,
Yep.
I mean, you've really got to root for injury because if that happens, Likely's going to be really highly ranked. So with both those guys, those are not really situations that I want to be a part of unless the guy, ahead of them or at least, with Knox and Kincaid perceived to be ahead of him, gets hurt. That's a situation there where I think you're going to see some movement there. But yeah, I'm not in on either one of those guys. I don't really want to touch either one of those guys. I would almost rather have especially I tell you who, you want to know who my most drafted player is in underdog fantasy leagues?
What's that?
It's kind of crazy. Taysom Hill.
God, I was about to bring him up.
That
was going to be the last name that I was going to bring up as we discussed.
No, I mean, especially in a best ball league. I mean, he's not a guy. Who the hell can predict what the heck he's going to do on a week in, week out basis? But when he comes out, if he scores, he's usually scoring a couple of touchdowns out there. So at the tight end position, what a great find to be able to find out there. So redraft leagues, I don't necessarily like him, but especially in a best ball league, what a spot. I mean, you get 2 touchdowns every week.
To your point, as what little value he brings as a tight end. This is his numbers from last year: 12 targets, 9 receptions. That's it. That's all he got. 76 yards receiving. But his value lies in what he does as a utilization piece and running for that Saints offense. Goes for 575 on the ground last year and 7 touchdowns. That's nuts. I mean, that's stuff that you cannot predict. You don't know where that's coming from on a week in, week out basis. And like you mentioned, he's your top drafted tight end on underdog. That's the perfect format for a Taysom Hill. Is a guy that you're drafting and throwing onto your roster in those last 2 rounds and will blow up 1 week, but then he'll disappear for 4.
And that's why he's perfect for best ball. In a regular league, he would blow your mind and you'd never be able to start him the right week. But in a best ball, you don't have to worry about that.
Right. And that's a situation this year too, is now you've got Derek Carr there. I would not suspect that the Saints are going to pull Derek Carr off the field to pull that mumbo jumbo gadget type crap that we've seen with Taysom Hill over the last 2 to 3 years that have just been headaches for fantasy managers. I don't suspect we see that this year, which is probably limiting Taysom Hill's production value. But also too, I mean, the running back situation, they've improved it. There's no need to put him in that situation now, except for gadget play situations, because Kamara with a 3-game suspension. Obviously, you got Jamal Williams there that's signed to be the short yardage back, and then Kendre Miller, the guy that we've talked about plenty on this podcast too. So I think there's limiting situations to where you could see Taysom Hill on the field.
You would think that, and then somehow they keep putting him out there multiple times inside the 5-yard line, and it's just crazy.
And and that was the thing, he was Sean Payton's love child for the time that Sean Payton had him while he was still the head coach for the New Orleans Saints. And so we saw a little bit more of a kind of specialized role, and we kind of knew when he was going to come on the field last year with that coaching staff. I think that's still going to kind of be a depreciating situation with him this year. Like you mentioned, obviously a best ball candidate. Don't want to touch him in redraft whatsoever. So that's kind of really that was the last name I really wanted to touch on, because he is such a wild card at the position. You have to factor him in to a discussion point because just what he can bring to the table. I mean, and if something were to happen with Juwan Johnson, obviously they got Foster Moreau there as well, who has spent time with Derek Carr with the Raiders. But I think if something were to happen to one or two of those tight ends, then Taysom Hill is definitely a guy that you're going to look at in redraft leagues. So that's really kind of what I wanted to touch on. Is there a very, very deep sleeper that you have your eye on that you would point out before we kind of wrap this one up?
I mean, I think we've chatted about him there. Trey McBride would be that deep guy. For me, I think again a lot really depends, but that's why he's ranked a little bit further back there is a guy like Trey McBride. There. Another name too that got a little action last year. Again, I don't necessarily think this is the year, but Jelani Woods. There you have a guy that could. Again, being the factor, he's going to be a red zone target. I feel like there for Anthony Richardson. So, Jelani Woods is definitely somebody I would keep an eye on. Again, I definitely be interested more of him in more of a dynasty format versus, redraft this year, but somebody to definitely keep an eye on.
Yeah. Speaking of dynasty, I would point out Luke Musgrave for the Packers. A lot of positive reports coming out of camp on him currently. So he's a name to keep an eye on in dynasty formats. And if you're looking at a dynasty format and a guy that you really want to put really, really deep onto your roster, that is we have talked about him on this podcast before. And I talked about him on the podathon that we did with Scott Fishbowl, and that's Jeremy Ruckert with the New York Jets. Another guy that's had really glowing reviews in camp early on so far. We saw him not play in the Hall of Fame game, which is a really good indication of what this coaching staff how they feel about him, is that they didn't want to risk him getting on the field early in preseason action. So I think they do have a role in mind even this year with Jeremy Ruckert, because let's face it, I mean, you've got Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzama. That's the other tight ends there. Not really two names that you would suspect that are going to separate themselves in that offense. So there could be a role there.
Sure. Then again, you had a guy like Robert Tonyan be, a top 12 tight end that, you see where he's at with the Bears right now in a backup role. So,
exactly.
Who knows?
Yes. And Steve popping in. Yes. Taysom. Yeah. Oof. Oh, man. And then talking about Steve also bringing up Tyler Conklin. Could be one of Aaron Rodgers' favorite receivers. Could be. But that also could be Jeremy Ruckert. We don't know. So I think, like I mentioned, I think that's a good dynasty pool. Have late in a draft, put on your rosters at kind of that last roster spot, and just see how things play out. I think that's
deep rosters to be rostered a guy like that.
Most of your dynasty rosters, you're looking at like 20 to 24 roster spots. You got a little bit of play in those situations. So
he's going to be a see it and prove it guy for me.
So you mentioned to me earlier, and I'll mention it back to you before we wrap it up here. You asked me my one fade that you're not going to touch this year. Who is that player for you at the tight end position?
So that guy for me is, let's see, let me go find him back again here. Yeah, that guy for me is probably going to be Evan Ingram. I think at his current ADP and kind of where he's going, that's not anybody that I want to touch. Again, he had a very good run last year there, but I think with some more mouths to feed in that offense there, I don't necessarily see him reverting back to the guy he was with the Giants.
Could be, yeah. We could be that flash in the pan year. I hope it's not. I hope
for your fishbowl sake.
For my fishbowl sake, I hope that is not the case. But I also do have Jake Ferguson on that team too, so I kind of covered myself with that one. So, but yeah, that's our tight end position, ladies and gentlemen. That is the draft plan. That is how you need to attack this position. One of the top 7 at the position we mentioned. Go after those guys. Get them at value if you can. But if you do need to reach a little bit to get one of those guys at the top 7, that is what you need to do to be able to be successful in your roster build with this position for 2023. After that, gambles, and it's week in, week out matchup plays with those players that we just mentioned outside the top 7. So
coming in next week, we're going to have our kicker show.
Yes. The Hefley favorite every
kicker
single
and
year.
Defense show, the special team show. I'm going to be leading the podcast this next week.
The special teams extravaganza, ladies and gentlemen, that will be led by Nick Hefley. Fresh talking points on how to attack the kicker position.
I'll be changing my Twitter name to kickers are people too.
But no, yeah, next week we'll probably get into a little bit of we'll recap some of the preseason games from this weekend, training camp news and notes that we've done the last couple of weeks, and really kind of look and analyze the preseason games, how offenses are looking, guys that stand out, like we mentioned with Tank Dell in this episode tonight, how he looked this evening. That'll be what we'll talk about next week, as well as getting into previewing and talking about the upcoming SBFFC big event in Bowling Green, Kentucky this next weekend.
We'll be coming to you live.
Coming to you live, sbffc.com. Go check that out. Pretty sure everything is, unless there's no shows that happen day of the event, we're all set and ready to go. Everybody
is 22, 23, 12-person divisions there. Is that what we're up to now?
22, I believe, is the tally right now of 12-team divisions. So it's
264 people.
Yeah, it is quite the event. So if you've never looked into it, never seen it, you're interested in getting into a high stakes event, sbffc.com is where you need to go. Check things out. Look, there's videos on there that show you how the event looks, interviews with managers that are at the draft, things like that as well. So definitely go and check that out. But that is the show for this evening. Go to rotoballer.com, sign up for our premium package with the promo code WOO to get you a special discount at checkout. And Nick, anything coming up that you want to let the listeners in on before we sign off?
Man, no, just excited to be watching some games coming to you live next week in Bowling Green there. Just excited to bring you some of these drafts that we're going to be competing in, give you a sense of what's going to be coming up so you can utilize in your drafts to hopefully get through the weeds and hopefully build yourself a good team. So
there you go. And of course, you can find Nick at The Real FF Goat on Twitter. I, of course, am at Roto Superstar on Twitter, and you are watching at Woo_podcast. And that is, we're putting a wrap on it, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, with another episode of Woo! See you later.